favor of you? Could we get some pictures together? I was wondering if I could get a picture with you and with Diane and Dave together with the plane. And then with you?
Friday night, the next one's the next day.
Snap 4 or 5. Do you mind? Why don't we start? She's very camera. Bye. So nice looking. And you want popping in? And Dave, you want to take a picture of me? On Friday night.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw your photo. But yeah, I already talked about it.
You're here. This is so exciting. Yes. Barbara.
I still have a video. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
With all that you're doing, I can't wonder about
It's really funny. I had a dream through.
Yeah, the office have
This is a one-off. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sitting there sitting
There's no do
this.
you be the
Oh my gosh. What's going on? He was dead-heavy. He was United Airlines pilot. And he was dead-heavy. And he was bringing back veterans to but they're bringing them back from Vietnam to, I think it's right Germany. So he was dead-heavy. So he had a really nice visit the whole time. He retired from United. And of course, I think he was 60 at that time. And so, anyway, he went to Alaska and they had a base there where the frigate cargo and he flew cargo up with United. And anyway, it's a long story short, he did some bush planting. I've been thanks to you. I've been watching it in this facility. Good stuff. We have some time. We went to St. John. We took a photo of St. John. Got the day in St. John. The weather got really good. That's pretty good stuff. As you know, when you land, tail over, you're here in the water. You go like this, you're under the water. And then you start to there was something about it. It was way before the Young. This is a kind of, yeah. I've been up there. It's great. Very late. What was it? Yeah. 75.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First off, I want to apologize for the lack of handouts this week. We had a printing issue this morning, so there are no handouts, so I apologize for that. Steve says I no autographs either, so. Again, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kevin Pillow, the Operation Manager at the Palm Springs Air Museum, and I want to thank you all for coming out for our first Saturday program of 2024. So happy New Year, happy holidays to everyone. Hope everyone had a great December and excited to start 2024. And thank you for joining us on a new year here at the museum. As is tradition for our Saturday program, I'd like to begin today's program by honoring America, the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand, remove your caps, and place your hand on your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would also like to those who have served or are still serving in the military today to remain standing. And on behalf of everyone here at the Palm Springs Air Museum and everyone attending, thank you for your service. Now, our guest speaker really doesn't need no introduction, but I couldn't think of anybody else to better introduce Steve than one of our own. He is a board member of the Palm Springs Air Museum. He's a longtime volunteer in the library, and he has committed his life to the remembrance of the missing in action and prisoners of war of the Vietnam era. It's my pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Dave.
Thank you, Kevin. Last year, my wife Diane and I attended a three-part lecture series at the Ranch Mirage Library. And the series was about Alfred Hitchcock and his movies that he had directed. And I was really impressed. And so after one of the presentations, I spoke to the presenter, Steve Smith, and I said, gosh, I wish you would be able to come over here to the museum and talk to us maybe about some of the films that he directed with a backdrop of either World War II or aviation or a combination of both. And he said, sure. So anyway, he's here. Stephen Smith. Stephen Smith is an award-winning and four-time Emmy nominee. He has produced over 200 documentaries on the subject of film, and his collaborators on those projects include Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, and Sidney Poitier. Stephen has appeared as a film historian in several documentaries about today's subject, Alfred Hitchcock, and has interviewed many of Hitchcock's co-workers and colleagues. Stephen and his lovely wife, Michelle, live in Rancho Mirage. Stephen, we'd love to welcome you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for being here today. Can you hear me okay in the back? All right. Well, you can hear how easy Dave made it for me. He basically introduced himself and then gave me the subject of today's talk, Hitchcock, war, planes. I said, absolutely. And I just have to say that my wife and I moved out to this area about 2.5 years ago, and we simply love being here. I'm very, very proud and honored to be in this incredible space with all of you. Thank you for making time today to do this. Well, we are going to be, from the comfort of our seats, doing a certain amount of world travel today. So I thought it might be nice to start, if I use this clicker, which was kindly provided by Kevin, whose computer I'm using here. I thought it might be fun to start our talk with a few words from the ultimate travel guide, for our children.
Have you planned your vacation yet? You have a choice between sand and sunburn, or mountain climbing and the Charlie horse. I find it all very enervating, but we should all have some kind of holiday. So, my suggestion is a quiet little tour, say about 2,000 miles. I have just made a motion picture, North by Northwest, to show you some of these delights. And the ideal place to start our holiday fun trip is New York, where Cary Grant can go places and do things. You don't find a tasteful little word on every guided tour, now do you? But this means we must leave Manhattan.
Hello there.
Tell me, why are you so good today?
Shall I climb up and tell you why? How do I know you aren't a murderer?
You don't. A train may be an old-fashioned way to travel, but an upper berth can be a lovely place to go when it's your time to go. After an uneventful fine night's rest, we arrive in Chicago. We seek out culture in a great art gathering. On this tour, you are sure of charming companions like Cary Grant, entirely relaxed, and a bit on the reticent side.
I'm an advertising man, not a red herring. I've got a job, a secretary, a mother, 2 ex-wives, and several bartenders dependent upon me. And I don't intend to disappoint them all by getting myself slightly killed.
And for vacation romance, how about an amorous blonde like Eva Marie Saint? She's the kind of girl that gets into a man's blood, even if she has to shoot her way in. Now for the best news of all. You can enjoy this wonderful vacation while seated comfortably in this theater. I promise you nothing but entertainment. A vacation from all your problems, as it was for me.
Thank you, Hitch. Well, much as I love Alfred Hitchcock films, I wouldn't exactly call them a vacation from our problems. They're more like a funhouse journey through our deepest fears, served up with wit and romance and excitement, and they are packed with unforgettable images, many centering around, as we will see, airplanes. Take, for instance, a World War II aircraft plant engulfed in flames, started by a saboteur. A man in a business suit chased across an empty field by a crop duster firing bullets. And an attack on a plane carrying journalists and diplomats that ends in a spectacular crash at sea. Hitchcock loved to take our most primal fears and turn them into classic cinema. And today I will be discussing the crucial role that airplanes had in Hitchcock's career, both in the scenes that he created for his movies and off camera, as he used the relatively new industry of air travel to promote his work and to make himself an internationally recognized brand. But before I get into that, I have one disclaimer. I am not an airplane expert. I will be talking about how Hitchcock used aircraft in his work, the way he used planes psychologically, the way he created his sequences decades before CGI. And after my part of the presentation, this part, I look forward to your thoughts and your insights about the real world of airplanes that are reflected in his fantasies. I hope we can have a conversation. But let's start by putting Hitchcock's fantasies into the context of his early life. Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born in East London on August 13, 1899. His father, who we see on the left, was a successful middle-class greengrocer. And by the way, that is not Alfred on the horse, it is his brother. Sadly, there do not seem to be any pictures of Hitch as a child, but I do think that it is an evocative image of this Victorian time, even without him in it. He had a comfortable upbringing, but early on, the scope of his life felt far too limited for someone who had a great imagination from an early age. He was fascinated by the technology emerging in the early 20th century, including flight. and he dreamed of seeing other countries. As a youth, he put a world map on his bedroom wall, and he would put flags on the map to mark imaginary trips that he wished to take around the globe. Many of those trips were to the United States, and he became, as he later put it, an Americophile. He would recall, "I was completely familiar with the map of New York. I used to send away for train schedules, and I knew many of the timetables by heart. Years before I ever came here, I could describe New York, tell you where the theaters and stores were located." Well, Hitchcock was 15 years old when World War I began, and the war would give him what he later called his first experience with genuine fear. Now, when we think of Britain being bombed, we usually think of World War II, but bombings also took place during the First World War. There were 52 Zeppelin raids on the United Kingdom between 1915 and 1916, and they took the lives of over 800 people. The worst attack happened on September 8, 1915, when an airship dropped bombs on the center of London. And beginning in 1917, German airplanes bombed Britain. One night during this time, Alfred Hitchcock, who was then in his teens, was in his family home in London, and he was petrified by the sound of bombs dropping near him. To quote his biographer, Patrick McGilligan, "They all fell to the floor. His mother took refuge under a table, murmuring prayers. But there was a Hitchcockian element of comedy to this terrifying scene. Despite the imminent danger, tea was still served. And his mother stopped her prayers long enough to say, 'Only one sugar for me.'" Well, getting back to Hitchcock's life, shortly before the war, he studied at the London County Council School of Engineering and Navigation. While there, he studied mechanics, electricity, acoustics, and navigation. In 1919, he joined the British film industry, originally as a designer and writer of title cards for silent films. But he was willing to jump in and do anything needed on set. He had tremendous energy, and he was a quick problem solver. And that led, in 1925, to his graduating to the director's chair. By 1934, at the age of 34, he had hit his stride in Britain with a series of hit films and his first really classic thrillers. There was the original version of The Man Who Knew Too Much. After that came The 39 Steps, a wonderful chase film in which an innocent man is hunted by the police who use a relatively new method of pursuit, an autogyro. What we actually see in the film, however, was a model of an Alro Sierra C-30A. Hitchcock's genius was his ability to translate his own fears, which were many, into brilliant sequences of anxiety and suspense that were relatable to audiences around the world. 1938's The Lady Vanishes takes place mostly on a train traveling through Europe. Hitchcock loved trains. It's about a British spy who disappears during a non-stop train journey. And Hitchcock and the screenwriters make its clever premise twice as exciting by setting it on a moving vehicle that is out of our character's control. And incidentally, this is one of several Hitchcock films that touched on the imminent threat of war in Europe, and it was released 1 year before World War II began. We'll see later how Hitchcock continued to put serious and at times controversial content like anti-Nazi messaging into films that disguised themselves as pure entertainment. Well, by the late 1930s, Hitchcock was eager to leave, well, his rainy, soggy homeland and work in the sun, or to be specific, the more technologically advanced studios of Hollywood. And in 1938, he got his wish. Producer David O. Selznick, who was then in the thick of making Gone with the Wind, offered Hitchcock a contract to work under him in America. And that contract committed Hitch to a certain number of films for Selznick, but it also let him work for other studios and other producers in between. In April of 1939, Hitchcock, his wife Alma, who was also his closest creative partner, and their daughter Pat traveled to America the way most people did from Britain and Europe at the time, by ocean liner. From New York, they headed west to begin a new and, as it turned out, permanent life in Los Angeles. At first, Hitchcock was very much under the thumb of Selznick, who had final say on their collaborations, from script to editing to music. Their films, though, included such classic dramas as Rebecca, with Joan Fontaine, Laurence Olivier, and Spellbound. But by the end of the 1940s, Hitchcock was free of self-made, and he spent the rest of his career making films as his own producer-director. By the 1950s, he was making such classics as Rear Window and Vertigo, and he had virtually total control of his own productions. So now that we have that overall perspective on his career, let's go back to Hitchcock's first years in Hollywood. The fact that he settled in America in 1939 led to some harsh criticism from a handful of producers back in Britain. They accused him of deserting them at a time when his talent could be useful for the war effort. But their accusations were not really fair or accurate. Because as early as his second American film, 1940's Foreign Correspondent, Hitchcock was putting more anti-Nazi content on screen than most filmmakers. This was at a time when the U.S. was a neutral party in the war, and a time when Hollywood's chief censor, Joseph Green, discouraged any criticism of Nazis in films. The production code, which is to say the Hollywood censorship Bible, said that foreign governments were not to be disparaged. But, of course, that changed after December 7, 1941. Hollywood began working after that with the U.S. government to produce as many patriotic anti-Nazi films as possible. And again, Hitchcock was among the first. In fact, the script for his 1942 thriller Saboteur, starring Robert Cummings, that script was begun in November of 1941, a month before Pearl Harbor. And it's interesting, the very first event in the very first movie Hitchcock made during U.S. involvement in World War II involves an act of sabotage at a California aircraft plant. The United States air defenses were a topic of much concern at that time. When Saboteur was being shot in early 1942, the city of Los Angeles and all of the movie studios were in a grip of fear that the West Coast would be attacked soon. On the night of February 25th, there was the notorious Battle of Los Angeles, which turned out to be a false alarm. So Hitchcock was rather prescient, I think, to open his movie Saboteur, which was already in production, with a scene of an attack on an aircraft plant in California. And impressively, he created his on-screen aircraft plant without spending a huge amount, using skills that he had honed working on lower budgeted films in Britain. What you will see in the next clip is actually a storage building on the Universal Studios backlot. And the planes you see are just a painting. Hitchcock told his art director, Robert Boyle, that no shot in the sequence would last longer than 5 seconds, and that was quick enough to fool the viewer. But Hitchcock also needed to show fire within that plant. And rather than show a giant explosion or fireball of the types of common in later action movies, Hitchcock starts the sequence with something subtler. And I say designed because Hitchcock would create rough drawings of what he wanted to see on screen. Those sketches would then be turned into more polished storyboards, and those were used for reference during filming. So let us see the end result of all that careful planning from the film Saboteur. In the clips that you see today from his films, there are very few lines of dialogue. And of course, there is wonderful dialogue in Hitchcock's films, but he began in the silent era. And part of the reason I think his films play so well and have done so well around the world is that he was such a visual and graphic storyteller. Well, in 1943, a year after Saboteur's successful release, Hitchcock made 2 short films that most of the public would not learn about for decades. Britain's Ministry of Information had asked him to direct 2 short subjects for the Allied war effort. The purpose of those films was to pay tribute to the French resistance, which was soon to play an important part in D-Day. Hitchcock would make these two films in England, directing French actors, and the intended audience would be French subjects living in free French territories. To make these movies, Hitchcock took what, as far as I have been able to determine, was his first flight across the Atlantic, and it was also his most dangerous. After taking a train to New York, he flew in a bomber sitting on the floor. It was a 14-hour flight, and since planes over the Atlantic faced aerial bombardment, it must have been a terrifying experience for Hitchcock. Adding to the stress was the fact that, as he later said, when we got halfway across the Atlantic, the plane had to turn back. I took another one 2 days later. Well, he made it to England, and one of the two films that he made there, Bon Voyage, centered on a Scottish RAF pilot whose plane is downed in Nazi-occupied France, and how this pilot gets back to Britain with help from the French resistance. That film in particular was both good propaganda and a suspenseful 25-minute drama, and it became one of the first British films to be shown in liberated France and Belgium. If you're interested in seeing it, by the way, you will find this and that other short subject. You'll find them both on YouTube. While he was making these propaganda films, Hitchcock stayed in London at Claridge's Hotel, and there he got a small taste of what the British had been facing for the last 4 years. He was having dinner with two older female cousins of his at his hotel, and during the meal, German planes could be heard flying overhead. There was a loud sound of anti-aircraft barrage, and throughout it, his cousins stayed totally calm. Finally, one of the ladies remarked to the other, "You know, my dear, the guns sound different here than they do at our house, don't they?" Hitchcock, not surprisingly, was terrified, and the sound of planes swooping down and the firing of their guns may have helped inspire one of his most famous film sequences 15 years later. It's found in the movie North by Northwest, starring Cary Grant. This may be the ultimate Hitchcock romantic thriller, liberally mixed, as you saw from the trailer, with a dash of comedy. But one famous scene in the film is anything but comedy. And in that scene, Roger Thornhill, a New York advertising man who has been mistaken for a spy, stands on an empty road in Indiana where he is expecting to meet someone. Instead, the emptiness of the scene is shattered by the appearance of something totally unexpected. The writer of North by Northwest, Ernest Lehman, later said that he and Hitchcock would talk about suspense sequences the director had imagined creating over the years. And it was Lehman's job to put them in the context of a story, which he did brilliantly. And also to have those nightmarish suspense sequences also have enough plausibility to work on the screen. Case in point, the scene where you're about to see. According to Ernest Lehman, Hitchcock said, "I've always wanted to do a scene in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing but this one man standing alone because the villains who are out to kill him have lured him out to this lonely spot. Suddenly a tornado comes along and..." "But Hitch," Lehman said, "how do the villains create a tornado?" "I have no idea," he replied. So Lehman said, "What if a plane comes out of the sky?" Well, Hitchcock owned a ranch, and recently he had noticed crop dusters working the fields near his ranch. So he said to Lehman, "Yes, the plane is a crop duster. We can plant crops nearby." Well, here's a great example of how a rough idea becomes first pages of script, and then that becomes a tremendous amount of work, particularly in 1958 when this sequence was shot and created, a time when special effects were far more rudimentary than they are today. Hitchcock found his empty Indiana road close to home in Bakersfield, California, and there he, along with his crew and Cary Grant, spent long and mostly miserable hours outside filming the wide shots. Now, even when working on location, Hitchcock usually wore the immaculate dark suit that he was known for. But in the baking sun of Bakersfield, where it was 110 in the shade, even Hitchcock loosened up and worked in his shirt sleeves. This was a fairly tiring shoot, and even the director's excellent continuity person, the person who makes sure that one shot matches another one, she lost track of the dust on Cary Grant's suit, which resulted in hours of retakes. It may explain the expression that Cary Grant has in that photo. But they got what they needed, and weeks later, the rest of the sequence was done in much more comfort on a soundstage that recreated the crop fields that Cary Grant runs through, Then they moved to a special effects stage at MGM in Culver City, which is what we see here. And as you can see, whenever that plane came close to Cary Grant, well, it was actually an image on a rear projection screen. Here is the final result of all of those pieces being put together. The makers of the James Bond series, which began 3 years later, definitely used this movie as a template. Cary Grant was considered to play James Bond, and as you may recall in the second of the films, From Russia with Love, there is a helicopter that is attacking James Bond, and it was almost a shot-for-shot copy of that, but Hitchock didn't say. Well, 4 years later, Hitchcock subjected moviegoers to another type of attack from above, this time from The Birds, released in 1963. And while the connection may not seem obvious at first, Hitchcock later said that some details in the film were inspired by that experience he had at Claridge's Hotel in London during World War II, especially his reaction to hearing bombs fall, the shouts and commotion from the street, and his own sense of feeling trapped inside. And I think you can see the parallels in the following sequence. And that reminds me, just on the subject of Hitchcock and technology, almost all of the bird sounds for the film were done electronically, using a device that no one really knew about. It was in Germany. And they used the bird sounds instead of musical scores, so the rhythm of the bird's attacks really give the whole film its sense of rhythm and pace. Well, now I would like to return to 1945, a time when, of course, the war in Europe was ending and the war with Japan was almost won. That year, Hitchcock showed again how ingeniously he could mix entertainment with real-world events. For the romantic thriller Notorious, starring Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant, one of my favorites, Hitchcock decided to base his story around Nazis who had escaped punishment and were setting up new lives in South America. This was not a topic that other filmmakers were exploring at the time. Even more perceptibly, Hitchcock decided that the mystery that would put the plot in motion, what he called the MacGuffin, would involve something that few Americans knew much about, and that would be uranium. In Notorious, the spies, played by Bergman and Grant, discovered that uranium is being stored by the Nazis in bottles that appear to be wine. Hitchcock learned about the government's use of plans for uranium during a trip he made to Washington in 1945 to discuss possible additional war work. By the time Notorious was released in 1946, to considerable acclaim, the world was well aware of how dangerous uranium could be. For more, just see Oppenheimer. And one last thought on Notorious, the film was almost entirely shot at RKO Studios in Hollywood. Very little travel involved, although the film itself is set in Rio de Janeiro. Hitchcock wanted the most realistic depiction of the city that he could achieve, so he had a cinematographer and a crew fly to Brazil to capture footage of the city, and that footage would be used as rear projection for all of the exterior scenes. To get the highest quality possible, he didn't just send any cinematographer. He hired Greg Toland, the legendary cameraman who shot Citizen Kane, to supervise the filming of the location footage in Brazil. And the final blend of studio shots and location footage was very good, especially for the time. Well, after World War II, the director was spending more time flying in planes than using them as on-screen instruments of doom. Hitchcock always set his films in specific, real-world places, and he wanted to bring as much realism as possible to his depiction of those places. That realism would balance the dreamlike terror of the scenes that we've been seeing that happen within them. Well, the development of new airliners like the Douglas DC-4, Lockheed's Constellations, and the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser all made it easier for Hollywood to travel and to film on location. And of all the directors during Hollywood's golden age, I think that Hitchcock travels the most. In 1954, he took Cary Grant and Grace Kelly to the French Riviera for To Catch a Thief, not a bad job. The following year, he filmed in Marrakesh, French Morocco, for the opening scenes of his remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much. During that shoot, planes also proved very useful when Hitchcock's team ran behind schedule and they were still filming one day before Ramadan. They had been told that filming on Ramadan was not only forbidden, but it would be extremely dangerous. Hitchcock left a few days before they were about to do the rest of the film in London, and as his associate producer and the crew captured the last shots that they needed just hours before Ramadan began, armed soldiers were on rooftops with rifles to protect them. The filmmakers were very glad to get on planes to London as soon as they finished. But location shooting was far from the only reason that Hitchcock spent a lot of time after World War II on airplanes. It is not unusual today for a director to promote his or her film internationally, but that was far less common in Hitchcock's time, and he did it more than any other major director. In the case of 1960's Psycho, which proved to be a success far beyond his own imagining, Hitchcock traveled from the United States to Honolulu and to Sydney, where he met this adorable koala. Then he traveled to Tokyo, Osaka, Hong Kong, Singapore, Rome, Naples, and Paris. Here is a short clip of him in 1948, arriving in Britain to begin a film with one of his favorite stars, Ingrid Bergman.
Arrivals at Heathrow. Film star Ingrid Bergman and director Alfred Hitchcock come in from Hollywood. Paris reporter and Hitch swap jobs. Our reporter directs and Hitchcock puts the question. Is your first time in England?
No. You'll be happy to know I spent my honeymoon in England.
Now Hitch poses a weighty question. Tell me, I think that the diet in England is going to do you a lot of good.
Yeah. No.
It's going to be good for you?
Well, I don't worry about it. Can I worry about you, then?
Well, thank you very much. Please don't worry. The Swedish-born actress wearing no makeup is looking lovelier than Hollywood has pictured her, has come over here to star in a British film.
Now you may be wondering, did Hitchcock ever make a film that was set principally on an airplane? No, he did not. But in the early 1960s, after Psycho, he did contemplate such a project. Now I'm sorry he didn't make it, because it really sounds interesting. It has a good premise. It was going to be an adaptation of the 1960 novel Village of Stars by Paul Stanton. The story is set during the Cold War, and it involves a military pilot whose plane is flying over the Middle East. He gets a message that Russian forces are entering that region, and the pilot's plane is carrying a nuclear bomb. He gets it ready for detonation. Then the Russians pull back, and the pilot is told to defuse the bomb. But he can't. There is a malfunction, and the bomb will not defuse. At the same time, the plane is running out of fuel. The bomb will detonate if the plane goes below 5,500 feet. Well, I think that could have been a terrific Hitchcock movie, sort of a forerunner of the movie Speed, which had a bus that couldn't go below a certain speed. And Hitchcock he loved that kind of challenge of a single location movie. He made the film Lifeboat entirely set in a lifeboat. And Rear Window, it all takes place in Jimmy Stewart's apartment. So I'm really sorry he didn't make that film, but interesting premise. It's the kind of project that would have inspired what Hitchcock liked to call the enjoyment of fear, which was very different from the genuine fear he would talk about that he experienced in life. Here he is explaining the difference.
English origins, American, Japanese, they're all the same. They all love to enjoy fear. They wallow in terror. And they always get off giggling, like off the Switchback Railway. So you learn never to explode bombs, or to save it at the last minute, and relieve the audience in the end, but give them all the apprehensions.
Which leads me to the last part of my presentation before we have, I hope, a Q&A, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the film. I would like to share with you a sequence that may be technologically antiquated by today's standards, but I think dramatically it holds up superbly. And it shows what a brilliant imagination Hitchcock had in terms of pushing the technology of his time to make moviegoers feel an intensely emotional experience. Here, that experience is a plane crash at the climax of the 1940 thriller Foreign Correspondent. To explain how Hitchcock created what was, for its time, a state-of-the-art effect sequence, I'm going to combine clips from the movie with two other sources. You will also see a little of an interview that Hitchcock gave to Dick Cavett in the 1970s. And you'll also see some excerpts from an excellent documentary about this film featuring Oscar-winning visual effects expert Greg Barron. That is part of the home video release of this movie, Foreign Correspondent, the version released by the Criterion Collection, if you want to watch it all. As far as the plot of the movie goes, all you need to know is that our heroes, led by Joel McRae, are in a plane fleeing Europe that is suddenly under attack by a German destroyer.
The first shot is what's called the Empire Flying Boat. This was made by the Short brothers. They made these flying boats, and they were very popular up to and during the war, especially because they didn't necessarily have all the airports set up so this airplane could land on the water and be effective as a way to travel around the world. So they established the scene by a miniature of the Empire flying boat flying, which is pretty straightforward.
Look, Carol, I've got nothing to do with spies or anything. I'm just a reporter. I came here after a story. Hey, Brother Tracy, what do they think they're doing? Molly, what is it? No,
When the German destroyer shoots at them, all the moments are experienced through the pilot. You see through his eyes the fear of what's happening, and then the audience then can immediately connect to being engaged in the sequence.
What's the name of it? What are they doing?
This is Hitchcock's, signature approach to filmmaking. It should not show establishment shots that pull you out of the picture, but to always find ways to keep you engaged in what's happening during the sequence.
How did you manage to get a shot where the view inside the cockpit went all the way down to the ocean, into the ocean, and the water came in?
You heard of the rear projection.
Yeah, they showed a picture on the back of the
Sure,
screen.
picture on the back and you play the scene in front of the screen. Well, I had a test pilot go out of Santa Monica and dive with a camera on the front of the plane toward the ocean. Pull out the glove.
There is a stunt pilot named Paul Nance. He had a camera mounted on the front of his airplane, and out at Santa Monica, he dove his plane with the camera, recording the ocean, until the very last minute, and he pulled out so that he could, on that piece of film, have an element of the water rushing toward you. And of course, he had to pull out in time. So, imagine that. You have to fly toward the ocean as close as you can to make the shot work, but not kill yourself. So this is clearly a lot of skill involved in his ability to shoot that special piece of film.
Then I had 6 screens, maybe 8 feet wide, 6 feet high. Built the cockpit, put the pilot in, and then the screen made a right screen. Behind the screen were 2 what we call dump tanks with chutes. These tanks are filled with 2,700 gallons of water each. All I had to do was press the button. And as I looked at the screen, the moment we touched water, I pressed the button, and the water shot right through the screen, tore it to ribbons, and all came in over the hull.
Sense that when the water comes in, the camera's moving around. And that's very unusual for that time. There's even one mistake in the film. When the water comes in, you can see the cameraman accidentally tilted up too far. He actually tilts off the set, and you see studio light. You see and it doesn't belong. You see that. It's just a glimpse of it. You can see the camera tilt up and then immediately tilt back down. Oops, I shot the set. But they didn't cut it out. I guess they figured that it was such a fast reveal that it didn't bother anybody. is also huge with them because you have your actors on the wing, on a tank in the foreground, with then a composite of a stormy sea behind them. And again, the illusion is very effective in how those elements were put together.
The enemy coming to pick us up. We're all right. You're American.
Very fun movie. I should credit one other important contributor to that sequence. The plane set was the work of William Cameron Menzies, who is widely considered the most important production designer in the history of film. The same year as Foreign Correspondent was made, Menzies won the first Academy Award for production design for his work on Gone with the Wind. Well, I mentioned earlier that Foreign Correspondent included some of the most explicit anti-Nazi and pro-Britain material to appear in an American film that was made when the U.S. was officially neutral in the conflict. To end this part of the presentation, I'd like to share with you the concluding moments of the film. Hitchcock and producer Walter Wanger were revising the story as real-world events were unfolding, and they ended the film with the following speech. And although it is part of a fictional story, I think it vividly captures the strong emotion that Hitchcock felt about the dangers facing democracy and his homeland.
This is London. We have as a guest tonight one of the soldiers of the press, one of the little army of historians who are writing history from beside the cannon's mouth. Foreign correspondent to the New York Globe, Huntley Haverstock.
Hello, America. I've been watching a part of the world being blown to pieces. A part of the world as nice as Vermont, Ohio, Virginia, California, and Illinois lies ripped up and bleeding like a steer in a slaughterhouse. And I've seen things that make the history of the savages read like Pollyanna legend. I have a great one. We should have to postpone the program. I'll postpone nothing. Let's go on as long as we can. Right if we have a show downstairs. How about it, Carol?
Listen, America, Tom.
Okay. Good talk. I can't read the rest of the speech I have because the lights are gone, so I'll just have to talk off the cuff. All that noise you hear isn't static. It's death coming to London. Yes, they're coming here now. You can hear the bombs falling on the streets in a moment. Don't tune me out. Hang on a while. This is a big story, and you're part of it. It's too late to do anything here now except stand in the dark and live in the dark. Because the lights were all out everywhere, except in America. Keep those lights burning. Cover them with steel. Bring them with guns. Build a canopy of battleships and bombing planes around. Hello, America. Hang on to your lights. They're the only lights left in the world.
That's what he always says. Well, I would love to turn the conversation over to you and me. But before that, I just wanted to briefly mention that if you wanted to see the films that we've been discussing, you can either find them individually via streaming, or you can find them if you still have disc players. There's a terrific Blu-ray set that has almost all the movies I've been talking about, the Alfred Hitchcock collection. And also, if you're of a mind to read a book about Hitchcock, some years ago I wrote a biography of his favorite composer, Bernard Herrmann, who wrote the famous music for Psycho and scored North by Northwest and Vertigo and many other Hitchcock classics. If you'd like to get in touch with me, if you'd like to get in touch with me, that's easy enough to do, either through the museum, or you can go to my website where I have my email, and just please email me there. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention very much, and if people have questions or thoughts, I would love to hear them. I'll repeat them back and do my best to answer them. Yes, Dave.
Not a question. I'm just going to let you know we have a library upstairs, and we have DVDs if you have a DVD player, and probably all those films that he showed you are up in the library. So if you're a member of the museum, you can check them out, no charge. So just to let you know.
Great. And for those watching this later, you can see all these films by becoming a member of this museum. So join this museum if you're not already a member. Yes, sir, in the third row.
Do you have a particular favorite of all of
Do I have a particular favorite? It's highly subjective, but I confess the one that's the most fun to watch is North by Northwest, because I think what Hitchcock says in that trailer is true. You really just get on that film like you're taking a ride, and you go on that ride for a very long time for a movie of its era. It's 2 hours and 19 minutes long. MGM was begging him to cut it shorter. Imagine what they would have thought if they'd known that today a top movie was 3 hours and 25 minutes long. But Hitchcock, I think, justified the length of that film, and that one to me holds up wonderfully. I'm curious to know if anyone has any other favorites. But some are more intense and dark, of course, particularly the later ones. Some are pure escapism. If you haven't seen his early British films, like The 39 Steps and The Lady Vanishes, those are all about 90 minutes and just pure joy of cinema. He's really like a young filmmaker of today who's just figured out how to do all these exciting tricks and fool people and excite people. He once said that, I think he was speaking with the screenwriter, yes, of Psycho, Joseph Stefano, and he said that what he did was basically, they were like an organ, the two of them, the screenwriter and the director. They were just playing certain notes to make the audience go ee and make them go ah. And someday perhaps everyone could just be connected to electrodes and they wouldn't have to make the film, or just think in a theater and something would be transmitted to their minds. Well, maybe we're not far off from that. I don't know if I have that kind of experience. But he certainly wanted it to be as immersive and emotionally involving as one could be. And I think one reason he succeeded, and one reason we're still talking about him, why there are news stories about him literally every single day that I get on my Google alerts because I'm writing a new Hitchcock-related book now. But why those films have endured is because he was so smart about going for things that were primal, that were universal, that played well in Asia, that played well around the world, where people responded to these movies. I also like the fact that he does not talk down to other cultures in his films that are international. You know, he knew that those people would be seeing the films, and I think that gives them a sophistication that often makes them hold up well today. Yes, Joe.
So in most of his films, he got top billing more than the stars. Was that because of that's the way he wanted it, or how did that?
Yes, the remark was that Hitchcock is billed, you see his name before his stars in virtually all of his films, certainly after he left David O. Selznick. Well, yes, Hitchcock saw himself as the author of the film. I mean, he didn't put it in those words, and I have to say he greatly appreciated good writers. He worked with Thornton Wilder, Sally Benson's John Steinbeck, Raymond Chandler, and people less famous but who were brilliant screenwriters. So he loved the written word. He worked with one of the greatest cinematographers of all time on most of his later films, Robert Burks. But he knew that people were coming to see an Alfred Hitchcock film. And later, when stars got more and more expensive, because, and I don't want to, forgive me, tell me if I'm going on too much of a side issue, but I think it's fascinating. In the old days of the studio system, actors were under these 7-year contracts, and they might make as many as 11 movies a year. The studio would say, finish that one on Saturday, and you're starting a new one on Monday. And their salaries were set, and it was pretty easy for a producer-director to make a movie with actors. Well, after the war, actors like Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant said, I'll make this movie if you give me a percentage of the film and, you know, a certain amount after the grosses and so forth. Things got much more complicated. And so when Hitchcock was making The Birds, he briefly considered having, and I'd love to have seen this pairing, Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn star in it. And he was sitting talking out loud with the writer, Evan Hunter, and he said, do I really want to pay Cary that much of the picture? No. And he said, the stars of this film are the birds and me. And then he looked at the writer, said, and of course, Evan, you. But, and you know, you can consider that egotism or arrogance, but he was right to know that people were going after a certain time period to see an Alfred Hitchcock movie, especially when he became, the thing that really made him famous was not movies, it was television. He was talked into, you know, hosting and producing his own television anthology series in 1955, something he wasn't wild about doing. He said, I don't even watch television. I'm too busy making movies and having good meals. But he produced and starred in this series. It ran for 10 years. It was an enormous success around the world, and that made him instantly recognizable in every country of the world. And that's when he starts appearing in his own trailers. And the person, by the way, who wrote that North by Northwest trailer was the same wonderful writer, James Alfred, who wrote all of his host intros on the Hitchcock show. He just had that perfect knowledge of how to make Hitchcock very wry and mordantly witty and dark. And people loved that because Hitchcock always pushed the envelope a little bit. He would give people things in movies and in television series that other people didn't dare to do. So that was why he put his name first. And in the early 40s, by the early 40s, he was being quoted as having supposedly said, actors are cattle. And as he loved to say in interviews for the rest of his life, I did not say that actors were cattle. What I probably said was actors should be treated like cattle. And the only non-thriller, really, that he ever directed after coming to America was a screwball comedy, of all things, called Mr. and Mrs. Smith, starring Carole Lombard. And he made it because he adored Carole Lombard. Everybody who knew that actress in the 1930s and early 40s loved Carole Lombard. So, and she had a great sense of humor, and that was reflected in the fact that on the first day on the set, he arrived to find a whole bunch of cows with name tags for the stars of the film. And he loved that. And in fact, we know that he has cameos in all of his films, where he briefly appears as himself. On that film, he had Carole Lombard direct his own cameo, and I found footage of that when I was making a documentary about her directing Alfred Hitchcock. So, thank you for asking. Yes, sir?
He had such a droll personality in doing those little clips that he would show. Was he that way in real life, or was he much more convivial and fun and jovial thing?
Yes, the excellent question. Was Hitchcock the way we see him, very reserved and contained? Was he more jovial? To that I would add, was he more of a loud person? Was he an openly anxious person? And one of the things that fascinates me, and one of the things that my new book is about, is the fact that Hitchcock really created a persona for himself, the one that we see and know so well from trailers like that one. And he kept everything inside, but inside he was filled with roiling terror, like a lot of us were. And he had the genius of understanding that and thinking of stories or situations, graphic images. He was an illustrator, and he could turn his many, many fears into things that he could contain and control. He was famously one of the most controlling directors on a set. And I should point out, he didn't control actors if he liked what they were doing. He sometimes gave his stars very little direction. But if Montgomery Clift in a movie called I Confess said, Hitch, I wouldn't look in that direction. My character would be doing this. He was very much a method actor. I'd be thinking about her. I'd be looking over there. And Hitchcock had to just keep saying, you're looking there because I'm cutting to the window where this is going to happen. And when people would say, Ingrid Bergman would say, I can't do that. And he famously said to her, Ingrid, it's only a movie. And she later said, whenever she was on the set and the director gave her something impossible to do, she would say to herself, Ingrid, it's only a movie. So he really found a way to take his anxieties and put them on screen. And every once in a while, they did come out. And there were two instances that his close personal assistant, Peggy Robertson, where he absolutely lost it and was yelling at someone. But only two, which was pretty impressive for a long, long career like his. And touchingly, I think, the time that he was at his most vulnerable, he just broke down sobbing on a daily basis, was when his wife, Alma, whom he married in 1926 and was his wife till his death in 1980, she was facing cancer, and it looked like she was not going to make it. And he'd just finished Vertigo, and he was doing a precedent at the time, and he went up to his hotel, and his daughter found him there, just sobbing, and he said, if she doesn't make it, I can't go on. And his daughter, Pat, who rarely saw him like this, said to him, and they were on a very high floor of this hotel, he said, if she doesn't make it, I'm just going to jump out the window. And she said, all right, why don't you just go ahead, jump out the window. And she left and waited a while to hear the window open. And then she ultimately went back in 10 minutes later, he'd fallen asleep in bed, so he was okay. But he was really, I find a fascinating case of someone who could control his feelings almost all the time. And much as Cary Grant created a persona on and off screen that was totally different from what the real person was, Archibald Leach was in life, he created the Cary Grant persona. Hitchcock, to some degree, did that, and he certainly created a persona for journalists. There were two for journalists. There were the ones where he told the familiar stories, the actors or cattle, and then there were ones like Francois Truffaut, where he would really get into the details, to some degree in the Dick Cavett interview, where he talks about the technique that he had. So anyway, thank you, Scott, for asking that question. Yes, in the back.
I think I wanted to make an observation and share something about. I'm a child psychologist, and I also studied Hitchcock when I was in college. I'm interested in film, and my husband's a screenwriter. And one of the things about Hitchcock that I had noticed when I was younger is that his use of the camera does all manner of things to you internally that you don't necessarily understand. You know something's happening, something is coming. Something I found out later with children when I worked with them is don't speak with very young children because they don't necessarily have a vocabulary, but they have a marvelous inner life, which has to do with graphic things, sounds that go like this are generally terror, and it's something that a child knows when they can't speak words. Sounds that mimic a graphic going back and forth, etc. like that.
Yes.
Hitchcock had this brilliant connection to a child who does not have words, but who has the unthought know, who can feel in his body, and sort of draw in his mind pictures of
Yes.
what terror looks like. And he was a genius at that. Just something I wanted to share is that he has connection, a deep connection to where terror begins and how it's represented without words. That's sharing.
Thank you for that. I hope that many of you, I hope you were all able to hear that, because that was too perfect to try to synopsize. But I will say that this former child psychologist, I'm sorry, what is your name, ma'am?
Julianne Poe
Julianne.
and the wife of Charles Edward Poe.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, the wife of Charles Edward Poe, screenwriter, absolutely. But thank you for being here. She was talking about Hitchcock's great graphic ability and and forgive me for paraphrasing in this way, his sense of having a childlike understanding of how sound and graphic imagery impacts people. And I think that you're so spot on, because Hitchcock, and this may, we'll never know if this is true. I think it is, but this was a story he always told of why he was so obsessed with stories about guilt and people who were innocent being accused and being on the run. And he said that when he was very young, 5, 6, or 7, when he was living in London, he did some minor childish infraction, and his father walked him to the local constabulary and had young Hitchcock put in a cell for a few minutes. And Hitchcock was taken out, and either the policeman or the father said, "This is what we do." The policeman said, "This is what we do to naughty boys." And Hitchcock said that was, he just let people understand that was a very traumatic experience for him. And I think that something like that clearly did happen to him, because that's in all of his movies. It's interesting to me at a time when the censors said that authority figures could not be really criticized in any way, that Hitchcock's films are all about questioning or fearing authority in many cases. And that was a very deep part of it. And yes, his incredible graphic sensibility. I mean, every single one of those scenes, I think, demonstrates that graphic sense. And I know that when I saw the crop duster scene when I was about 10 years old on television as part of a 1-hour documentary about him, I was terrified. It never left my mind for, ever after that. Similarly, it wasn't relevant to this, but the great sequence in Saboteur, that movie we were talking about where there's a fire in the plant, it ends at the Statue of Liberty, where the actor Norman Lloyd is hanging on the edge, and we watch his sleeve of his jacket slowly unravel until he falls. And there's no music at all. You just kind of hear these distant kind of boats in the water, and it's just terrifying. And so, yes, Hitchcock was usually concerned about making things feel subjective. There are some moments where he steps out of it and gives you the God's eye view, as it was called in The Birds, where you see the birds over Bodega Bay about to come down. But mostly, you're with the Tippi Hedren character, seeing things through her eyes and watching it happen. So thank you for making that observation. And I haven't been looking at the time. It's 2:04. So yes, sir. Is there time for one more question, Kevin? Yes, sir. In the back.
That movie, Saboteur, is a guilty pleasure of mine. Is it in fact a remake of an earlier Hitchcock movie?
Yes, he asked if Saboteur was a remake of an earlier movie. Unofficially, yes, it is really an American remake of 39 Steps. In those days, British movies were not shown very widely in America. You didn't have the art house cinemas or the chains that might show films. You certainly didn't have home video or television. So although Hitchcock's films were seen in America, you know, a film like 39 Steps in 1935 would only be seen in New York, in Los Angeles, in the major cities. So I think he felt that in arriving in America and wanting to tell a very American story, he could take the basic plot of the 39 Steps, a man wrongly accused who exonerates himself, spies, who can you trust, and use that. So I'd say, you know, unofficially, yes, I'd say Saboteur is, I would consider a remake of the 39 Steps. Well, with that, I want to thank again the Palm Springs Air Museum for hosting this fabulous presentation screen that they offer, and especially all of you for coming out on this beautiful day to watch and listen. Thank you. And if there's anything else you'd like to discuss, please do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin, for your computer.
Oh, no problem. I just want to let you know that we have some more programs coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have Combat Contrails in Vietnam, presented by William Scott, here next Saturday. And in a couple of weeks, Doug Thomas will be ready, willing, and able, the story of the B-24 crew. I do want to say thank you to a lot of our program sponsors, including the Barker Foundation, the Shalhoub family, the Chandi Group, the Berger Foundation, the Conrad Hilton Foundation, the Houston Family Foundation, and El Paseo Jewelers, as well as members of the museum and those who paid for tickets to come in today. If it were not for you, we would not be able to put on programs like this, as well as the First Light program, the shirt that I'm representing. And I would like to remind everybody that the museum will be closed on February 10th, but an opportunity for you to continue to give to the museum is our annual gala to be held that day. And so if you need more information about that and how you can contribute to the education program and the Palm Springs Air Museum, you can go to our website and look for the gala tab. Without further ado, again, one more time for Stephen. This and all of our other programs will be available on our YouTube page, which of course is alongside our world-famous Warburg Wednesday program, and also some of our documentaries. So enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the museum.
If you get a chance, play that movie.
Yeah,
Of course, I like her.
yes, yeah, proud of it. Hey, how are you?
When I was and then Charles and college actors. And when I started we're sharing back into our training costume, and they all you know, everybody.
Yours is very
No, I think
Oh, I would love to. I have retired, but I do go back. I've been sitting here like, not even wanting to get the
I mean, other than their conscience,
okay, and I'll
It's so offensive. Still, it's over the grocery store.
So now, I think it'll be a great game. Michigan's going to be tough.
I can do it. I can do it. And I go out to the office.
I don't have explanations.
All the that's what first game.
Well, once I get moving, then I'll do it. Yeah. Well, okay. Hey, it was good. I'll see you. I share a sandwich with you. I gotta go to
Jason is the one that had the training. I told him, I'm not going to go to you asking for anything. You got these chasing anymore. Turned in $43. Today,
No, it's me.
He is chill here. It's not bad if it's letting you do your job. Yep.
I hope. Yeah.
Daughter who's trying to make that work. Trying to convince me to bring some of the weapons from.
If I know how to work on it, how would it work? Like when I have to like, I got a big step, I have to learn it on Amazon.
That's right here.
That's what I have.
After you, sir.
okay. Tell me, Robbie.